Okay, Erev Tov, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. I wanted to express my appreciation to Albert and Heidi Proa, who was sponsoring the Shiur tonight in memory of Albert's father, Maurice Proa, whose yahrzeit is this evening tomorrow. Maurice Proa was a Holocaust survivor who maintained his faith and commitment even during the most difficult and darkest of times. And he survived, and he went on to, with courage and resilience, he raised a beautiful family, and he was a leader in the community, who was a president of Beth Jacob congregation, who did so much for the shul. He also, his son Albert, who's sponsoring the Shiur, is now the chairman of Jewish Federation and a leader in Beth Jacob as well, and Harold and the rest of the family. And so some of you remember Maurice Proa fondly. I see it in the chat. Thank you so much, Rifki, that he was a lovely man. You knew him well. That's wonderful. And so may his memory be for a blessing and inspiration to all of us. Tonight, I wanted to learn together with you a topic that's kind of a continuation of the series of the development of Halacha. And this is always very interesting to see how Halacha develops from the pasuk in the Torah to the Mishnah, to the Gemara, to the Rishonim. Right, the Rishonim are the commentaries who lived in the medieval centuries, the 11th century, 12th century, 13th century, 14th century, until essentially the Shulchan Aruch that was written in the 1500s. Those commentaries like Rashi, Rambam, Ramban, Rush, and the Ravid and the Ramban and the Ritva, the Rashba, those are all Rishonim. The commentaries after the Shulchan Aruch are known usually as Achronim. These are like the later commentaries, like the Shach and the Taz and the Gra and the Rabbi Kiva Eger. So, and you have earlier Achronim, later Achronim. So it's always interesting to understand the development of Halacha over the course of the centuries, how it goes from the pasuk to the source, to the Mishnah Gemara as understood by the Rishonim and Achronim to modern day times. Now, with regards to Kashrut, so tonight we're going to talk about a detail in the laws of Kashrut, and we're going to talk specifically about Chalav Yisrael. All right, Chalav Yisrael, does that mean Jewish milk, or does it mean milk supervised by a Jew? And is there a requirement to drink Chalav Yisrael? What I want to actually explain tonight is that most of you, according to Moshe Feinstein, actually are stringent, and you do drink Chalav Yisrael. This just brings to mind the joke in terms of people keeping halacha, and then there's people who keep certain stringencies in halacha. So there's a story about a man who came to his chavruta, who he was studying with for many years, and he told him that he's not Jewish. So the man was so surprised to hear that. He says, "You're not Jewish? Now you're revealing me this information? We've been studying together for 20 years, and we learned together actually that a non-Jew is not supposed to keep Shabbat. And I know you, and you're somebody who keeps Shabbat, and now you're telling me that you're not Jewish." And the man said, "Well, I'll tell you something, which is that, yeah, I'm not Jewish, and I really don't keep Shabbat, because whenever I walk outside, I have a key. I have a key in my pocket." So the man said, "What do you mean you have a key in your pocket? But there's an Erev in this community." So the man says, "Yeah, I don't hold from that Erev." So so that's kind of reflective of the fact that in halacha you have kind of like the Iker Dedina, the baseline level of Jewish law, and then sometimes there's a preference for astringency, or there's stringencies that are observed by some people and not others. Sometimes it's appropriate. Sometimes it's appropriate to observe astringency. Okay, hold on one moment, please. Okay, so what I want to talk about tonight is the topic of just responding to someone in my family. What I wanted to talk tonight is about the topic of Chalav Yisrael. Now, one of the foundational halachos, mitzvos for the Jewish people is the laws of Kashrut. We know when it comes to animals, right? If you want to keep kosher, so modern day times in the year 2020, you buy, whether it's COVID regulations or not, right? The laws of Kashrut still apply. And you buy all products that have a hechsher, a kosher supervision, and you make sure to separate between meat and milk. Those are kind of two basic things that you have to do to keep the laws of kashrut. But of course, the laws of kashrut are complicated. And if we go deeper and further back to the Torah, we know that you have animals, some animals that are kosher, and some that are not kosher. For an animal to be kosher, it has to have two signs. It has to have a split hoof and chew its cud. For milk to be kosher, there's a principle in the Gemara that for milk to be kosher, it has to be derived from a kosher animal. That's a general principle in Jewish law, that something that comes from or is secreted by a kosher animal is kosher, but if it is derived from a non-kosher animal, so then it's usually going to be not kosher. One interesting exception to this is honey, is bee honey. A bee is something that's forbidden, but bee honey, right? Honey is something that's permitted. The Gemara wonders about this and says it's based on tradition that honey is permitted. And one of the proofs why honey is permitted is because it praises the land of Israel as an Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash, that Israel is a land flowing with milk and honey. So it would be strange, the Gemara says, that the Torah is praising the land of Israel with something that's not kosher and that you're not allowed to eat. The Gemara says, you see from this pasuk that honey is something from a bee is something that is permitted. Now, there's also date honey, there's other types of honey, but that's one of the sources that teaches us that honey is, even from a bee, is permitted, even though it derives from something that's not kosher. That exception aside, the general principle is, when it comes to milk, that only milk that comes from a kosher animal is kosher. So what's going on here with Chalav Yisrael? Why do I need Jewish milk? Or why do I need it to be milk that's kind of blessed or supervised by a Jew? What does Chalav Yisrael even mean? And why is it the situation today where many people don't seem to be stringent for it, but people will say, oh, is it Chalav Yisrael? And you have certain stores, right, or ice cream shops that say this is the Chalav Yisrael ice cream and this is the non-Chalav Yisrael ice cream. And I'm not going to get into tonight why is it sometimes, unfortunately, it seems like Chalav Yisrael maybe doesn't last as long or maybe doesn't taste as good. But of course, there's a lot of excellent Chalav Yisrael products. The question is it necessary for a Jew who cares about halacha like you all do to keep Chalav Yisrael? And what is Chalav Yisrael? So the Mishnah is pretty straightforward in Masechta Avodah Zarah. The Mishnah in Avodah Zarah, Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis, lists off all the different things that are prohibited to be consumed, but are permitted to benefit from. When it comes to kashrut, there's a small class of items where it's forbidden to eat, and it's also forbidden to benefit. It's called, there's an Isser Achila and an Isser Hana. This is like a higher level of stringency, where you can't benefit from it, you can't eat it. So for example, a chametz on Pesach, you're not allowed to eat and you're also not allowed to benefit from it. You're actually not even allowed to own it. With regards to meat and milk mixtures, you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to benefit from it, you're not allowed to cook it. You're not allowed to cook a meat and milk mixture, right? Because it says, lo savashal gedi b'chalev imo, that you shouldn't cook a kid in its mother's milk. That's understood by the rabbis to be referring to all meat and milk, and it's interpreted by the sages that one pasuk is going on prohibition to eat, another pasuk is teaching us the prohibition to benefit, and the third pasuk is teaching us the prohibition to cook. The rabbis were the ones who extended the law to say that just like you can't have meat together with milk, so too you can't have Midrabanan, rabbinically, you can't have chicken together with milk or dairy. But the rabbis extended that restriction only to eating. You're not allowed to eat like a chicken parmesan, but you are allowed to benefit from a chicken and cheese sandwich. You're allowed to cook. If a person is in culinary school, wants to know what they're allowed to cook, so they're not allowed to cook a meat and milk a mixture. They can't even cook something as simple as a cheeseburger. But you are allowed to cook. The halacha is you're not allowed to eat midrabanan, rabbinically. You're not allowed to eat chicken and cheese, but you are allowed to cook them together, and you would be allowed to benefit from a chicken and cheese mixture. The general rule, ladies and gentlemen, regarding non-kosher items, regarding treif items, is that you're not allowed to eat them, but you are allowed to benefit from it. But when I say that you're allowed to benefit, it means like as a kind of like a one-time benefit. You're still not allowed to have a business in non-kosher food. But if a person happens to acquire food and it ends up being not kosher, then you're allowed to usually benefit from it. Again, we said chametz you're not allowed to benefit from, a meat and milk mixture you're not allowed to benefit from. But if it's just simply a non-kosher food, or let's say it's pork, or it's something that just didn't have proper shechita, most non-kosher foods you're not allowed to eat, but you are allowed to benefit from. But what that means is if you're a fisherman and you're fishing for tuna or salmon, and a non-kosher fish comes into the net, so you're allowed to. You don't have to throw it out. You're allowed to give it to an animal. You're allowed to sell it to a non-Jew. You're allowed to benefit from it. But as I said, you shouldn't have a business. You shouldn't have like a set established business dealing in non-kosher food. But if it happens that you come upon some non-kosher items, then you're allowed to benefit from it. So this Mishnah in Avodah Zarah lists off a number of other items where you're not allowed to eat, but you are allowed to benefit, and they all relate to things that are related to non-Jews. So it says, Elu dvarim shel ovdei kochavim, the following things of idolaters or non-Jews, asurim, they're prohibited, ve'ein isurim israna, but you're allowed to benefit from it. And the first item listed in the Mishnah is chalav shecholvo oved kochavim, milk that was milked. If you have milk of an animal, of a cow, shecholvo, that was milked by a non-Jew. Ve'ein Yisrael ro'eyu, and there's no Jew supervising the milking of the animal. So that's something that the Mishnah, that's the first item listed in the Mishnah as being in this category of items that you're simply not allowed to consume that milk or that dairy product made from that milk. The Gemara wonders, so what is it? What's the reason why there's such a prohibition? So the reason why there's a prohibition is because there's a concern that the non-Jew might mix together with the cow milk. He might mix together camel's milk. A cow is kosher, and therefore the milk of a cow is kosher. A camel is not kosher, and so the milk of a camel is not kosher. So the Gemara says the reason why it's prohibited to have milk of a non-Jew that did not have the supervision of a Jew is because there's a concern that maybe the non-Jew mixed together. In other words, it might be that it's just camel's milk. Maybe if it's camel's milk straight up, so then you might notice the difference between the appearance of the camel's milk from the cow's milk. So the concern is that even though it looks like cow's milk, but maybe he mixed in some non-kosher milk with the kosher milk. And for that reason, the Mishnah seems to be straightforward, as explained by the Gemara, that you must have what's called Chalav Yisrael. That's the idea of Chalav Yisrael. Okay, Chalav Yisrael means it's a straight Mishnah. that says that you need to have either milk that was milked by a Jew or that it was milked by a non-Jew, but that a Jew doesn't have to be a rabbi, just has to be an honest, trustworthy person who's supervising the milking from the milking to the carton, then that's also kosher. But that seems to be the straightforward requirement of Chalav Yisrael. Okay, I'm just looking at the comments. Okay. It's been suggested that it doesn't last as long. Okay, then we have another comment that someone's allergic to milk. Okay, so then you don't have an issue if you're allergic to milk. So you don't have an issue with that. Okay, good. But for those so that's a lot of people are lactose intolerant. So therefore you have to take either have lactate or you take lactate pills. So you still have the issue. You still have the issue there of Chalav Yisrael. So the question is, why is this such a complicated issue? It seems to be pretty cut and dry. Rav Moshe Feinstein proposes an idea that really kind of revolutionized this whole discussion. The Chazon Ish has a similar theory, and they propose the following. And Rav Moshe Feinstein, of course, was the Gadol Hador, the Torah giant of the previous generation who lived on the Lower East Side. And Rav Moshe Feinstein's responsa are found in the Igros Moshe, And he has a tshuva, he has a responsa. You know what a responsa called in kind of rabbinic parlance? They're called shut. Shoot. She'elot v'tshuvot, shoot. Shin vav taf. So people might call it shutim, or it's in the shut, Igrot Moshe. Okay, so in the shut, Igrot Moshe, in the She'el v'tshuvot, Igrot Moshe, from Rav Moshe Feinstein, in Yuredeya, Chelek Aleph, Siman Mem Zayin, he has a tshuva that's entitled Binyan Chalav HaCompanies Shem V'din Asenu. So milk or dairy products manufactured by companies or dairy farms in the United States of America. This is a tshuva that is dated Tatvav Sivan Tavshin Yudalid. That's around 1954. He proposes the following idea. He explains that in the United States, so you have government regulations of the USDA, where, according to the regulations, companies are prohibited from mixing in any other types of milk other than a cow. Any milk that's sold in the United States is cow's milk. Now, I didn't look into it. It's possible that a dairy is allowed to sell milk, camel's milk or horse's milk if it's, in clear print, camel's milk. But any milk that's sold in the United States of America is cow's milk. And if it's being sold as milk, straight milk, then that's the regulations in the United States where it has to be from a cow, which of course is a kosher animal. And Rav Moshe says like this, and this is interesting because it gets us into the kind of the mindset of a posek. And one of the things that he says is that he notices that there are many rabbis and many Jews who are drinking regular milk in New York, other states around the United States. And it's hard to believe, he says, God forbid, that these Jews and these rabbis are violating the law. It's interesting because I was just talking with my daughter today about, there's another Mishnah in Masechta Avodah Zarah that says that you're not allowed to do business with Ovdei Kochavim, with idolaters, around the time of their holidays. And so all the commentaries, including Tosfot, wonder why is it that Jews do business with their non-Jewish neighbors during the course of the year, and we don't seem to follow that restriction of the Mishnah. And it's almost as if, like, the starting point is we see that everyone's doing business, so now, it's not is it permitted to do business with them around the time of their holiday or not? But rather it's we see that everyone is doing it. Why is that so? And for this specific thing, Tosfos says because maybe in the days of the Mishnah, the concern is that if they make a profit, and hopefully the deal is good for the Jew, it's good for the non-Jew. But if the non-Jew is happy about the deal, he might go and praise the idol or praise his God. The Jew will therefore inadvertently be causing some form of avodah zarah. For that reason, that's why you don't do business around the time of their holiday. So Tosfos says that many of the non-Jews among whom we live are not so frum, they're not so religious. They're not going to, if they make a profit, they're not going to go praise their God or praise their idols because they made a profit. That's the approach of Tosfos. But it just reminds me also about the fact that the Rav Soloveitchik was once in the hospital. There's a question these days in terms of what you're allowed to say to non-Jews. They say to you, Happy Hanukkah. What do you respond? Or you see them in the store, what do you respond? I think it's fine to say, you could say Happy Holidays.
Happy holidays.
I think you say Happy Holidays is fine. I think that's fine. I think one should avoid, being more specific. But I think Happy Holidays is fine. Have a happy and healthy New Year, I think is fine. Rav Soloveitchik was in the hospital once, and the nurse came in, a very, very nice lady, Christian, and she said to the rabbi, Rabbi, it's Good Friday today. Can you give me a blessing? Rav Aaron didn't know what to say, and he thinks for a moment, and he says, I wish you a good Sunday, a good Monday, a good Tuesday, a good Wednesday, a good Thursday, and a good Friday. So a little bit similar to this law when it comes to doing business with Ovdei Kochavim or non-Jews, where generally speaking, right, it's permitted. Now the question is why. It's not quite to that extent, but Rav Moshe Feinstein does kind of advance that reasoning. He says, we see everyone doing it. We see everyone drinking regular milk here in the United States. So it's hard to believe that they're in violation of the law. So let's see if we can figure out why it's permitted. I don't think, but he doesn't say it in that way. And that's not an accurate representation of what happens. I mean, Rav Moshe Feinstein felt that it's permitted, but he does mention, he says, hard to believe that it's forbidden if so many people are doing it. But the question is, how can Rav Moshe Feinstein say it's permitted to have regular milk? The Mishnah in Avodah Zarah is clear and straightforward. You have to have Chalav Yisrael. So Rav Moshe says like this. He says that with the U.S., I began to explain it, he says that with government regulations, companies are prohibited from mixing in other types of milk. And so hypothetically, if a company were to incorporate non-kosher milk, so their company would be penalized and it might even be shut down. So because the company or the farm, Ida and Martin and everyone, because the company or the farm is fearful that they'll be penalized and might be shut down, so this fear creates a presumption that the companies will not mix in non-kosher milk. And Rav Moshe says that since we have this presumption, there's room for leniency, because if you have a presumption, if you have a knowledge of something with such certainty, it's as if you're seeing it. And Rav Moshe develops this idea that when do you need supervision? When do you need witnesses? That's just to confirm that something happened. But if you can establish it based on other evidence, based even on a strong presumption, so then that's what Rav Moshe calls an anan sadeh. An anan sadeh. It's as if we're seeing it. And so Rav Moshe has an incredible psak, which is that yes, you need to have a Jew supervising it for it to be kosher. But halachically speaking, in the United States, thankfully, we have the government regulations that require it to be cow's milk and nothing else. I think I might have saw it put in here about goat milk, okay, but it has to be clearly marked as goat milk. And anyway, goat milk is kosher also. But so government regulations require it to be kosher milk and nothing else. And the companies are fearful that if they violate the regulations, that'll be a severe penalty or bad for their reputation and for their sales. For that reason, it's as if the Jew is supervising it. It's as if we're there witnessing it because we're so sure that the dairy is going to follow the regulations. Just one word of clarification. What does it mean when you see OUD? And then I want to further analyze what Rav Moshe's tshuva and the disagreement of some other poskim. And I have a couple more things to say about Rav Moshe's tshuva. But before that, what does it mean when it says OUD?
It's either dairy or on a dairy.
Orthodox Union Dairy, right?
Yeah. So is that Chalav Yisrael?
According to Moshe Feinstein, it is.
Right. So according to Moshe Feinstein, so what Rav Moshe Feinstein says is basically because of government regulations, any regular milk in the United States is considered like Chalav Yisrael. That's one of my novel things that I want to share with you tonight, which is that yes, that we all drink Chalav Yisrael. We all drink Chalav Yisrael because
$30.
we all drink Chalav Yisrael because of the regulations create a presumption that make it as if it's tantamount to us witnessing it. So it's like Chalav Yisrael. You need to have Chalav Yisrael. You need to have milk that's supervised by a Jew for it to be kosher. And the Jew has to see that it's coming from a kosher animal or a cow. But Rav Moshe says that because of our situation in modern day America, and maybe if other countries have similar rules, but in modern day America, so then it's considered like Chalav Yisrael. Having said that, from now on for the rest of the Shiur, but really it's not what people call, colloquially, they don't call it Chalav Yisrael, right? They call it Chalav Stam. So even though Rav Moshe has that chiddush that it's like Chalav Yisrael, but for the rest of the Shiur, what I say is Chalav Yisrael. Chalav Yisrael really means that it's supervised practically by a Jew. It's not enough to know that it's kosher milk. Like when it comes to other products, the Jew doesn't have to be watching it all the time. As long as you're reasonably certain, as long as you're certain that it's all kosher ingredients, so then it's kosher. You don't necessarily have to be watching it the whole time. But with milk, what the Mishnah says is that you need to have the Jew watching it the whole time. Rav Moshe's chiddush is that it's okay if you don't.
Rabbi Topp?
But when it says OUD, here's what I want to just clarify. When it says OUD, that's not Chalav Yisrael. Leaving aside Rav Moshe's novel ruling and using Chalav Yisrael the way it's usually used, OUD is not Chalav Yisrael. And by the way, even Rav Moshe Feinstein agrees that it's better that a person who's very, very careful should only have the traditional Chalav Yisrael. Rav Moshe Feinstein says it's permitted to have regular milk based on his reasoning, but he says that Baal Nefesh, a person who's very, very careful and stringent, should be, that it's preferable to have Chalav Yisrael. So even Rav Moshe agrees to that. So OUD, what does OUD mean? OUD means that I don't know the specifics, but that's not Chalav Yisrael. What that means is that the OU went down to the dairy farm and they saw that everything is in order, that it's a reliable and reputable place. They might visit again, I don't know the specifics. So they visit once every 6 months. Is it once every 3 months? Is it once a month? It's a reputable place. Everything seems to be in order, but there's not a mashgiach there around the clock supervising it. The mashgiach is somebody who visits the dairy farm in Minnesota or in Idaho, wherever it is, from time to time. That's what OUD means. If the mashgiach is there around the clock, then that's what's called Chalav Yisrael, traditional Chalav Yisrael. So I recommend, just as a, I think it's a good idea, even for those who are not stringent for Chalav Yisrael, it's a good recommendation to only get something that has a hashgacha, like a chavk or an OK or an OU, because then you have some measure of reassurance and confidence, that this is a reputable, reliable place, that is not cutting corners in the milking process. But you should just be, don't be confused that it's not Chalav Yisrael. Yeah, let's get a couple of questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how it was in 1954 when Rav Moshe made this psak, but I was at a dairy farm someplace here in California many years ago. I want to say 40 years ago. And the milk does not see the light of day. Everything is mechanized, mechanic, whatever it is. They have the milking things that go on the cow. It goes through pipes, it goes through bottling, and it doesn't see the light of day till you open it up in your house. There was absolutely 0% that they could mix different milks unless they were milking camels in the facility. But it's the way they milk today, and I saw this in Israel as well, is that it's all, what do you say, what's the word,
mechanical or mechanized?
Mechanized.
Thank you. I couldn't think of the word. It's all mechanized. It is all mechanized from the way the milking thing goes on the udders of the cow all the way through. So it doesn't see the light of day till you open it up on your table.
Yeah.
So that's actually one of the reasons why Rav Soloveitchik gave 3 reasons for leniency. One is based on what we just discussed. Another reason is because that if the Gemara seems to suggest the possibility that if you have a farm where there's no treif animals, meaning where they just have kosher animals, so maybe the Mishnah doesn't apply. Maybe the Mishnah's requirement to have a Jew supervising is only if it's a non-Jew that has a flock that has some kosher animals and some non-kosher animals. That's when the Jew has to supervise it. But if the non-Jew has only cows or only kosher animals there, so then that would be different. And the third reason that I think Rav Soloveitchik gives is because he talks about mechanical. He says that mechanical milking through machines may leave room for leniency. That maybe the rabbinic prohibition of non-Jewish milk is only if the non-Jew, if it's done by a non-Jew and it's done, with the human process. But being that it's mechanized, it's mechanical, Rivki, that was actually one of the reasons Rav Soloveitchik gave for leniency.
But then it wouldn't make a difference if there were only kosher animals or also non-kosher, because once it's mechanized, there is no human involvement.
Yeah, but still, it's mechanized, but it's coming from animals, and so the question is that's another issue, which is that the key is that the animal be kosher. The Mishnah seems to suggest that you need a Jew supervising it to establish that the animal is kosher. But we're suggesting is there's a possibility is that maybe you only need Jewish supervision, if there's some non-kosher animals around. But if there's no non-kosher animals around, then maybe that's another reason for leniency, separate from the issue of the machines.
Okay.
Yeah, Ron.
So basically, if you look at Israel, there's a lot of mixing of milk because in the Negev, they sell milk ice cream. The Druze and the Israelis both eat it. In the Negev area, they eat soy milk and they drink soy milk, female. The problem was before 1954, because basically what happened is you had to have a Jew in there when the whole thing starts to make sure that the container doesn't have any leftover from a tray of milk. And it's not boiled. Tray of milk was not boiled and then poured, and then you put something in the container, you know. So it was very strict. But after 1954, you know, with the mechanized milking, there's no such problem. However, there was a rabbi named Zev his name was Zev Weitman. And he said something very smart. He says, we don't have to worry about it because who is going to drink halal that's not kosher? Because non-kosher halal of milk and so is much more expensive than cow's milk. So you don't have to worry about it. Feinstein, on the other hand, said the government regulation says that if you basically have, you know, anything goes wrong, they shut you down. He actually used fear. So he said, we don't have to worry about it. But you know, they still mix milk in Israel. You know, meat, cow with camel with sow. So that's the reason is you can mix it. And the last thing I want to say is it's even more strict when it comes to cheese and butter, but not so strict when it comes to powder milk. It's, you know, the Isur is even worse on cheese, you know, that is supposed to be Chalav Yisrael. I don't know what the reason is, but for some reason it is.
Right, right. Okay, thank you for sharing all those points, Ron. Yeah, milk is a more complicated process. And so, you know, certainly you need to have a hechsher. You need to have a hechsher.
That's why I drink almond milk.
Cheese.
Solves the
But,
problem.
and that's an interesting point in terms of if the non-kosher milk is more expensive, then that's, you know, then
It
there's less concern that they're going to be mixing in that. Rav, yeah, Miriam, go ahead. Miriam and then Fran.
I'm saying this without judgment or argument or anything. I understand that if you do not pay the OU, then of course they will not stamp OU on the can or on the container or on whatever it is that the product is, if you do not pay them. Well, that's okay. They're in a business. They need to get paid. But one, is that factual? And two, again, my first question. Thank you.
Yeah, kosher milk is from a kosher animal. Non-kosher milk is from a non-kosher animal.
Well, like,
So,
for example.
yeah, so let's say if you have cow milk or goat's milk is kosher, but camel's milk or horse's milk or pig's milk is not kosher. So for milk to be kosher, it has to be from a kosher animal. That's what we started with, Miriam.
Okay.
In terms of the OU is, I think, the gold standard of kashrut. I think they're involved with kashrut with really integrity, honesty, and professionalism. And of course, they need to be paid because they're offering services, right? You need to have human beings who are giving their whole schedule to ensure that it's kosher. So it makes sense for the company to have to pay the OU for their time and effort and expertise. And so the OU is not going to just without being paid. But the fact that they're being paid doesn't mean and shouldn't be understood to mean that there's any corruption involved, God forbid, or that it's politics or it's just no. It's I think it's reasonable for them to be paid for their time and expertise.
Okay.
Now,
one quick thing: how do we make cheese from milk? What constitutes non-kosher cheese?
It has rennet in it.
Right, it's a cheese. It has to because cheese is made with rennet. So the question is it rennet from a kosher animal or rennet from a non-kosher animal? There's also vegetable rennet. But that's really a different in terms of cheese production. That's a separate separate discussion. Rav Moshe Sternbuch, interestingly, disagrees with Rav Moshe Feinstein. And he believes that a couple of things. Oh, Fran, you wanted to share a thought?
Yes. Did you hear about the rabbi who was in the hospital? He needed a heart valve replaced. And the doctor came in and says, Rabbi, I don't know what to do. The only valve I can get is a pig's valve. And I know you're kosher. So what do you want me to do? And the rabbi thinks and he thinks and he says, well, I don't have to eat it, So go ahead and use it.
That's true.
Just a little side note.
That's an interesting. Yeah, I think it's permitted. It's permitted. I think I'm not sure if if you're telling that as a fictional story or not, but
No, it's true.
No, it could happen.
it could happen, and it's actually something that I once heard about, and I think it would be permitted.
Because the pig's heart is the closest to a human heart there is, any other animal. It's the closest one to human heart. That's why.
Linda and Dick, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Rabbi, in places other than in California, where there isn't the OU or other such agencies are not operating, it would seem that using the psak of Rav Moshe, that you could buy the milk even if it doesn't have an OU and or OK or anything else, as long as it's cow's milk.
That's absolutely correct. I think it is permitted. It is permitted to purchase any milk in the United States of America. I think, though, I would recommend. I think it's a nice thing if you can to get milk that has an OU on it, just to give you a certain measure of confidence that everything's in order at the dairy that's producing the milk. But you're absolutely correct that that OU doesn't make it Chalav Yisrael, and so you're not getting that that stringent. That's that you're not going to be observing that stringency with the OU, and you could get the milk even without the OU. But I do recommend it. I think it's a good thing, to get milk only that has the OU. Rav Moshe Sternbuch, I want to just get to, which is that he questions whether the fine in which the companies would be penalized would instill sufficient fear into the companies that'll, get them to follow the regulations no matter what. He wonders, that with these big dairy farms and their profit margins, and if there's going to be a small penalty, he wonders whether really that's going to instill fear in the companies to make sure that they always follow the rules. The second thing that he mentions is that, yes, Rav Moshe Feinstein's theory, and it's also advanced by the Chazon Ish, although the Chazon Ish didn't really rule it practically. He said that, it could be relied on maybe for someone who's sick. The Chazon Ish didn't seem to intend his explanation to be applied practically to everyone. Rav Moshe Feinstein advances his ruling for everyone that they could follow. But Rav Moshe Sternbuch says that theory of Rav Moshe is only addressing the issue of the non-Jew mixing in non-kosher milk. He says, but he quotes the Gra, and the Gra points out that with regards to rabbinic prohibitions, sometimes they say that they give you one reason explicitly, but there could be additional reasons for the particular edict. And based on that concept of the Gra, Rav Moshe Sternbuch says that yes, the rabbis prohibited not milk supervised by a non-Jew. The explicit reason that they give is because there's a concern that maybe he'll mix in camel's milk or mix in horse's milk. But really, there's other reasons. Maybe part of the reason for the rabbis' prohibition is that they wanted us to have a greater degree of separation between us and the non-Jews. Maybe by something as a core and essential as milk. Maybe the rabbis felt that there was a benefit and a value in it just being milked by a Jew or supervised by a Jew. I mean, he says since it was an official prohibition that we don't necessarily know all the reasons behind it. Now the counter argument to that is that maybe this really wasn't it wasn't an inherent prohibition of the rabbis that you can't have non-Jewish milk. No, the rabbis were just concerned that maybe non-kosher milk would be mixed in. And if that was it wasn't an official decree. Yes, if it's an official decree, then it's prohibited. And we usually are not lenient when it comes to an official prohibition. And even if we understand the reason and then we have a circumstance where the reason doesn't apply, but maybe there's other reasons, and maybe the rabbis just made an outright blanket prohibition no matter what. But with regards to, and if you say that it's a blanket prohibition, so that would be the argument against Rav Moshe Feinstein's theory, right? Rav Moshe Sternbuch says that this was a prohibition, and we don't know all the reasons for it, and therefore you just have to have milk that's traditional Chalav Yisrael. But the counter argument to that is that it wasn't a formal prohibition in all circumstances. The rabbi said that you shouldn't have milk without the supervision of a Jew because of a concern that he mixed in non-kosher milk. Because that was part of the whole decree, was that it was a concern. It wasn't a blanket prohibition. It's a concern that they'll mix in non-kosher milk. So if you can determine based on the circumstances that there's no such concern, so then it's going to be permitted. Right? Rav Soloveitchik said, if there's no non-kosher animals on the farm, so maybe that's different. Rav Moshe Feinstein's theory is, if there's government regulations and there's going to be a serious penalties, and the government might shut down the company if they violate the regulations, so then it's as if we're seeing with our own eyes that they're milking cows, and then there's no concern. There's no concern that they're mixing in non-kosher milk. And so it's interesting in terms of the development of halacha, how you have the pasuk. The pasuk says you just have to have kosher milk. The pasuk doesn't address if it's milked by a non-Jew. This does seem to be a rabbinic prohibition based on the concern as we discussed. And it's articulated in the Mishnah and explained by the Gemara. Rav Moshe Feinstein comes to hundreds and hundreds of years later, says that yes, the halacha of the Mishnah, is valid for those circumstances. But now we have different circumstances. We're blessed to live in a country that has certain protocols and a system in place. And he comes to a leniency based on the new circumstances. But then it gets into, what kind of halacha is it? Was it a formal prohibition? That number, it might have multiple reasons for it, and usually it's a blanket prohibition across the board. And once you have a prohibition, it's hard to overturn the prohibition. Or do you say that no, it was a prohibition, but always with the reason? It was a prohibition of the rabbis that you shouldn't have such milk because of the concern, but it was never a blanket prohibition. So these are some of the different details that go into a posek, how they reach a determination of the law. And this psak of Rav Moshe, ladies and gentlemen, this is really what's followed by many, by a significant percentage of the observant Jewish community who care about halacha, who keep kosher, but they rely on Rav Moshe to have Chobani yogurt, to have Ben and Jerry's ice cream, to have OU products, Chav K products, even if it's not Chalav Yisrael. But certainly there's room within halacha to say, I'm going to be stringent and only keep Chalav Yisrael. One shouldn't scoff at that, because in fact it is based on a Mishnah, and that does have a tradition to it to only have milk that's produced under direct supervision of a Jew. There's certainly basis for that. But Rav Moshe Feinstein and also the Chazon Ish and Rav Soloveitchik was also lenient, and Rav Moshe Feinstein showed the basis for the widespread custom to have chalav stam and not to be makbid, not to be stringent on chalav. Yeah, Yala.
Ralph's milk is kosher all year round without the Chalav Yisrael, and it's even kosher for Pesach as long as you buy it before Pesach. So that shows that what Feinstein said has a lot of koach.
Well, obviously.
Right. So it's interesting when you come to chametz, because I said earlier that chametz is something that's more serious a prohibition. You're not allowed to eat, benefit, or even have in your possession. You're not allowed to own chametz over the course of Pesach. That's why you either get rid of it, you destroy it, or you sell it to a non-Jew through the rabbi. Right, the rabbi helps you sell it to a non-Jew. with chametz, and even if a little bit falls into a mixture, it's going to prohibit the whole mixture. But if the chametz is from before Pesach, then it'll be nullified by it. So when you talk about Ralph's milk, the fact that it has, that it's kosher even for Pesach, that's relying on this revolutionary ruling of Rav Moshe Feinstein.
Rabbi Topp?
Yes.
Okay, two things. One is many years ago, I was on a non-kosher kibbutz in Hashafet, which is a very big kibbutz. I have family there, and it happens not to be religious or kosher, but they have a dairy farm. And they were producing Chalav Yisrael for Pesach. And it was very funny. It was like 2 or 3 weeks before Pesach, whatever. And they also have mechanized milking, but they were only allowed, and this was very funny, they were only allowed to eat matzah in the facility because chas v'chalila, a piece of bread could fall in, which would be, and there's no batel
b'shishim. Mashiach comes in.
Right. Well, there's no batel, but there's no batel b'shishim when it comes to chametz on milk. So we do not eat matzah for 30 days before Pesach, but they were only eating matzah because if some matzah were to fall somewhere there wouldn't be the issue of chametz falling in. But I have another point that I want to make, and that is, in the United States, it's a non-issue because of it's accepted for the country, the USDA, and it's cow's milk and it's mechanized and so forth. Where the issue really comes into place is when you're in Europe, because
Rivki, you put yourself on mute. I didn't do that.
I said, you don't know in Europe, when you're in Europe, if you're in Spain or if you're in France or any of these other countries, what their system of milking is. We know very well the system in the United States. I don't know what it is in Europe. So the question—
I can tell you. In Europe—
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry. Rachel, you could unmute yourself, please.
So in France, for example, they rent the entire farm. They come usually Saturday night, late at night. They do a hechsher of the entire place, and then they start milking on Sunday and Monday, because those 2 days the Christian farms are off, and they take advantage of those 2 days to get the milk they need.
But is that only, so that would be Chalav Yisrael, but let's say you went into a regular, that's Chalav Yisrael because you have a mashgiach. But if you went into a cafe and ordered a cup of coffee, or you went into a market and bought a bottle of milk, I guess you would have to, it's something
Rivki,
that I think a lot of people
to get to
think about.
Rivki, so if I could just interject, you're mentioning a great point, which is that this discussion has relevance mainly for the United States of America and countries that have a similar systems in place. But if it's in Europe or other places where they don't have the strict regulations in place that we've been discussing, and where you can sell kosher milk and non-kosher milk, so then in that case, you would have to have Chalav Yisrael. You'd have to follow Chalav Yisrael. And so let's just to end. I think if something is, let's say, if Chalav Yisrael is more expensive, or if Chalav Yisrael, if the quality is not as good, so then I think there's a lot of basis to just have, regular milk, regular dairy products. Now, if it's like ice cream or dairy chocolate and other things like that, then you need to have a hechsher. It has to have an OU, or it has to have a reliable Kashrut supervision on it. That doesn't mean it's Chalav Yisrael, as I explained, but it means that it's kosher. If it's straight milk and it's being sold in the United States of America, as Dick pointed out astutely, if it's straight milk in the United States of America, then it doesn't really even need a hechsher. It is permitted to buy regular milk from the store in the United States because that's the psak of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Again, I recommend it's because usually there's so many different milks that have an OU that it's a good idea to try to get a milk with a hechsher. But But anyway, I think it's an interesting topic. Hope you appreciated and enjoyed it, and gives us an understanding of this, Chalav Yisrael. I think it shows the development of Jewish law. It shows how poskim kind of analyzed the situation, and I think it also shows the boldness of Rav Moshe Feinstein in issuing that psak in a very creative way, to because he believed that it kind of was logical, and it was very, very kind of like bold, courageous psak of Rav Moshe that made it much easier for Jews in America to follow the laws of to live in America and follow all the laws of Kashrut. So thank you all so very much. Laila Tov. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Topp.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Topp.
Thanks, Mom. How are you?
Thank God. Thank God we're good.
Hi, Shelley. How are you?
That's
Ruth-
actually Ruthie, my mother-in-law.
I'm confused. Right?
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, I enjoy all your comments.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
I
yeah.
talk too much.
No, not at all.
It's interesting because I've been to a few dairy farms, which is not standard, but I was one in Israel and here, and I found it, if anybody's ever been, it's so interesting to see the way they milk cows, because we drink it every day and we take it for granted because it's on our table, but it's really an interesting thing to, very, very interesting. Yeah.
It is, it
Everybody
really
well?
is. Thank God, thank God.
I'm good.
Nice
Take
to
Thank
see
care.
you.
you.
Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you so
Lila
much.
Tov, Lila Tov, best regards.
Thank you. All the best.